Welcome to Net Zero Action Heroes, where we recognize the sustainability leaders driving real change at scale to turn the tide on climate change. Each episode, we interview an individual who's helping to build a more sustainable planet. Let's get started.
Hello and welcome to Net Zero Action Heroes. I'm Chris Pullum, and this episode is brought to you by Turntide Technologies, an award-winning sustainability company. Today, our guest is Andy Sumner, the Commercial Director of Future Motors. Andy, thanks for joining me.
You're welcome. Pleasure. Thanks, Chris.
So I was hoping that you could start off by explaining what Future Motors does and why that's important in today's climate.
Well, Future Motors is a business that sells and installs and manages installations for corporate businesses, and we sell exclusively Turntide products, so particularly Turntide building products. And the reason why it's important, I guess, is very simple, is that Turntide have come up with a technology which they've developed into really smart motors. And the bottom line about these smart motors is they significantly save energy, money and carbon for corporate businesses. And there's a very simple path to implement them. And so for me, it's a really, really exciting and interesting business because we've got the opportunity to make a real difference.
Yeah. And so, you said it both saves money for businesses, but also kind of reduces energy consumption. So there's both a savings element and, like a climate element to it as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, and that's exactly correct. And they're symbiotic rather than being mutually exclusive, which perhaps might have been the case in the past. So if you have a standard building, say an office building in a city, if you look at the energy it consumes, so somewhere between, and it depends on the building, somewhere between 40 and 80% of the electricity that building consumes is consumed by their heating and ventilation system to move air around the building, not necessarily even to heat or cool it, but to move it around. Because you can imagine that physically moving large volumes of air around a building takes a lot of energy. And so the Turntide motors are motors that drive air conditioning units, drive big fans in air conditioning units to move air around buildings in order to keep people warm and cool, in order to ensure that buildings have the right air quality for their employees. So sort of makes sense to me that somewhere between 40 and 80% of the building's electricity is consumed by these motors. And we have, between Future Motors and Turntide, we have a technology that can materially reduce the consumption of those motors. Well, actually, this turns the dial, this makes a difference. And so that was really interesting. And what's, I guess, even more interesting is that was the theory. So I was told that Turntide motors will save between 30 and 70% of electricity. And I thought, well, sounds great. 10% would be good, but 30 to 70%. And actually in practice, it turns out to be true. So genuinely quite an extraordinary thing, not a particularly sexy thing. Not a thing that not a lot of people know about, certainly not one that makes the headlines, but nonetheless, a piece of technology that when deployed makes a very, very significant impact on energy consumption and carbon savings.
Yeah. And so you're retrofitting the motors that currently exist in buildings, correct?
That's correct.
So can you kind of walk me through what is the difference between today's high energy efficient motors that can go in these buildings and what you're replacing, what's already in those buildings?
Yeah, so it's really quite simple. Motor technology, electric motor technology, which is what we're talking about, had broadly not changed for 100 or so years. There's been marginal improvements, marginal gains in the efficiency of those motors, but they are about as efficient as they can possibly get because of the inherent limitations of the design. They're called induction motors. The Turntide proposition is something called a switch reluctance motor, which is I won't bore you with the technical details, but it's a completely different design to the induction motor, and it's software control. So it uses incredibly clever software with algorithms to very precisely control the power that goes into that motor to maximize its efficiency. That's sort of it in a nutshell. I'm probably doing our technical guys a massive disservice, but in summary, it's a really clever motor that is designed to be as efficient as possible. So the inherent design of the motor is replacing motors that are probably as efficient as they can probably get through their design limitations with a completely different design. What's also important, of course, is if you're going to make a difference and make a difference quickly, you need to make sure that you can replace the old with the new. And one of the really interesting things about the Turntide proposition is that For most motors that are in situ in buildings, it is a simple replacement. So in effect, it's as simple as unbolting the old motor, bolting the new motor in the same footprint as the existing motor, hooking it up to the fan, and away you go. And what that means is that it is much less capital intense than handling units in their entirety, which other technologies which have some efficiency benefits are able to do. This is just much simpler, much quicker, significantly less disruptive to buildings, and overall a much more elegant, in my opinion, proposition than any alternatives that are out there.
Awesome. You're in Europe. So what markets within Europe do you work out of?
So at the moment we are in the UK, which is the most established market. We're in Spain, Italy, and the Republic of Ireland, and we are looking to expand across other geographies in Europe. I'll just take you back, Chris, we're about making a difference. We're about making a difference to the environment by convincing as many people as we can to adopt a technology which dramatically reduces the consumption of electricity. We're all about the demand side of the equation. So supply and demand. Lots of people are focused very much on supply. We're entirely focused on demand. And the fact of the matter is, for many organizations, there aren't a lot of choices out there in terms of materially reducing your energy demand. We're one of the few that actually can apply to pretty much any business. Most businesses can benefit significantly from our proposition. And if we are going to make a difference, and the organization, everybody in our organization has a passion about the sustainability agenda, about making that difference. If we are going to make a difference, we've got to expand rapidly, and we've got to ensure that we get the maximum level of adoption that we can. The only way we're going to do that is by, as I said earlier, ensuring people have a quality experience, ensuring they get the outcomes that they deserve, and building an organization that can put their foot down the accelerator very quickly to expand rapidly. And that's our ambition.
Yeah. And I mean, like you said earlier in the conversation, if we're going to, solve this climate problem, we have to attack it from so many different directions. One of the things that I think that is, most unique and powerful about your proposition is that, yes, it will save the planet, but you're doing it in a way that businesses will save money at the same time. And that's going to motivate them to be so much more interested in getting involved. And that's going to just unlock so many more opportunities. And I have some stats here for you. So in Europe specifically, since the beginning of 2021, wholesale electricity costs have spiked by more than 400% in many European Union countries since the beginning of 2021. So, against that backdrop, how important is that?
Well, I mean, it's hugely important. They say in life and in comedy, timing is everything. And the timing really is acting in our favor. If you look at that stat, 400% increase in wholesale prices is true. Wholesale prices are not what business consumers pay, right? So their pricing hasn't gone up 400%, but it has gone up. And we've seen, depending on which customer, between 100 and 200% energy inflation pricing over the last few months. Genuinely, it is completely unprecedented. Never in my career across multiple industries have I seen a very significant cost line in any business go up that much in that shorter period of time. What's really interesting as well is the analysts think that these prices are here not just because of short-term issues like the COVID crisis or indeed the war in Ukraine. The underlying position is they're likely to stay significantly higher and very significantly higher than they were over the last few years for the next 10 years. So this is here for the next decade, right? The interesting, and in many ways for many businesses and for a whole bunch of other reasons, that is incredibly bad news. So the small crumb of comfort in the energy price inflation for organizations is it makes the payback period, the time it takes for you to get your money back when you've made that investment, come down significantly. So if you look back historically, take LED as for instance, certainly in Europe and in the UK, most organizations have moved on into LED lighting because it was a very simple solution, retrofit solution. And typically the payback was 2 years or less, which met most corporate guidelines. With the inflation energy, that means solutions like ours now all of a sudden have the same criteria. So typically the payback period for our solution will be 2 years or less, sometimes a lot less, sometimes a little more. It will depend on the customer environment, but the same ballpark as LED. The only difference is that electric motors moving HVAC consume 2.5 times more electricity in a building than lighting ever did. So actually, and you'd expect me to say this, of course I'm going to say this, but the next logical thing for most organizations to do is say, right, the lowest hanging fruit was LED. Now we've got another equally lower hanging fruit, which is the electric motors and HVAC in our buildings. Right, let's do that. And then after that, you can start going after the more difficult bits with a longer payback. And the list is going to be long for organizations.
Yeah, I mean, that was a lot of great stuff, a lot of stuff that I want to touch on. One thing that I first and foremost want to drill down into, though, is, I mean, we mentioned a little bit about Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Obviously, that's just terrible geopolitically and humanitarian, but it will have a huge impact on energy prices. But it's also important, I think, to put it in perspective in the sense that I mentioned that the huge spike in energy wholesale prices earlier, electricity prices.
Yeah.
But actually, the biggest spike came a couple weeks before the invasion of Ukraine. And so obviously, the prices were impacted by the invasion, but the biggest spike came before the invasion. It came, more than a year after COVID became a thing that was really impacting the world. So it's not like just these major events are impacting energy prices. They're not helping the situation. And they're probably adding to how long this is going to be impacting the world.
Yeah.
But it's not like we can just wait for these terrible things to be over and we'll go back to normal. Like you said, these things are here to stay.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's a whole bunch of reasons, demand in China, nuclear power plants being switched off in Germany, and. There's a whole bunch of reasons why the price has increased. But then I think what's interesting for me is you look at the Ukraine crisis, which is, I'm a European. I've lived in Europe all my life. I've had my family were involved in, my grandfather fought in the Second World War against fascism. I thought that all this stuff was behind us. It is almost inconceivable to me what's happening in the Ukraine with potentially a totalitarian state flexing its muscles in the same way that happened many years ago. We thought had been confined to the annals of history, but paid back again. And one of the ways that that's being paid for is by effectively Europe being held to ransom by Russia on that supply of energy, which keeps our world going. Supplies industry, keeps us warm at home, allows us to be on this recording with you, etc. And one of the things I've noticed is that there's been lots of talk about Europe weans itself off Russian gas and oil, and that's primarily by looking to procure it from the Middle East or from the US or elsewhere. But not enough, in my opinion, to be done on looking at demand side.
Compared the motor to LEDs earlier, which I thought was a really striking comparison, because obviously everyone knows about the energy saving abilities of LEDs. Hopefully these motors, get to that point going forward. My question for you is, if a company has already, revamped their lighting, they're full of LEDs, and they don't go the motor route, is there a viable alternative to capture more savings right now, or is really the motor the next option?
Yeah, well, there's always things you can do around the edges. So there are lots of different technologies that you can utilize to reduce consumption. None of them have the same impact as driving air through a building. So if you want to make the biggest difference in terms of saving energy and reducing your building's carbon footprint, actually, if our proposition had been available at the beginning of the LED revolution, you should still have done ours first, because lighting, whilst is a big consumer of electricity, moving air around a building is 2.5 times more consumptive of electricity than lighting. So you tackle the big things first, if there's a solution for it. Now, the reason why nobody tackled that 5-10 years ago, because there wasn't a solution. Now there is.
Mm-hmm. So then, obviously this seems like a great proposition. The one thing that we always hear in the US media, at least, for anything that's really related to climate tech or sustainability, it seems like a lot of this technology, is held up by supply chain issues.
Yep.
So I'm curious, Future Motors, are you impacted by supply chain?
The answer is yes and no. Mostly no, and a little bit yes. So what we're seeing is, supply chain issues are broadly around a number of things, but specifically around microelectronics. And we buy microelectronics, or Turd Type buy microelectronics from the same market that BMW do and everybody else does. And there's a global dearth. One of the things that and I'd like to say that this was incredible foresight with a mystic ability to see the future, but to be honest, it was more luck than judgment, is that we took the decision that we could see a very high level of demand. And in partnership with Turntide, we just opened up a new warehouse in the UK, and we decided that we would order a very large amount of stock. So we're in a fairly unique position in that if you want to buy electric motors, and there are a couple of other efficient electric motors out there, different technologies to induction motors, not as efficient as ours, but arguably inferior for a whole bunch of reasons. But if you wanted to buy them, you're going to have to wait a year or two because the supply chain issue has impacted them significantly. We're in a fortunate position to have a very big warehouse that's full of kit, and we've forward ordered stuff. So we've got more motors arriving in June and September and December. So I think we can be reasonably confident that certainly for the next year or so, we're going to be able to meet demand.
Yeah, and on that note, I saw in the news recently that Future Motors and Wilko, which is a huge retail chain in the UK, you won the Low Carbon Achievement Award at the H&V News Awards 2021. Could you walk me through that project? Could you walk me through that project and what went into that award?
Yeah, so Wilko is a really interesting business. I'm a key shopper there myself. It's a business that provides lots of sort of essential products, if you like, from hardware, domestic products. And they use the phrase hardworking people. So they're very, very price conscious. And they're very clear that they want to deliver the best possible value to their customers. Wilko had transitioned to LED, and they were keen to do a couple of things. Firstly, they've got a very forward-thinking agenda on sustainability. And secondly, they believe in driving as much cost out to their business as they can in order that they can deliver the best possible value to their clients. That's their main, delivering real good value to their customers. So we engaged with them, we ran a pilot, we showed 40% savings on their pilot, and we rolled out to 400 stores across the UK, so 800 motors or so, a large rollout. And what's really interesting, what's really clever was that they took the like-for-like savings and they reinvested those savings into a new building management system, which helped them control the way those builders managed to drive down that savings even further. So the 40% savings they got just from the like-for-like motor replacement was augmented by a further 20% savings that they got from being smarter about the way that they manage their business, using technology to drive down the consumption, and our motors integrating with that technology to reduce stuff down further. So it was a really, really interesting project for us. And I think it was the fact that our technology delivered significant savings, but also the intelligent way that Wilko went about this project to say, okay, well, if we want to make an investment in BMS, how do we pay for that? Well, let's pay for it by saving money in our electric motors. And as a consequence, the overall result has been stunning. 60% saving on their HVAC electricity costs. So it's quite extraordinary.
Yeah, I think any business would be thrilled to cut energy consumption, electricity consumption by more than 50%. That's a huge improvement.
Yeah, I mean, it is truly extraordinary. And it does genuinely sound almost too good to be true. And on this occasion, it isn't.
You also mentioned, I think, 400 locations and 800 motors. Do I have that right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And you also said, I believe, that there really wasn't any disruption. How is that possible?
It's about a couple of things. Firstly, we've got some really strong project management resource in our building, and we established a really good working relationship with the team at Wilko. Those things matter, right? Getting those teams to work together really, really well genuinely matters. The second thing, and I'll take you back to something I said much earlier on in the interview, is we should never underestimate the potential for things to go wrong in business and in rollouts. And there are a myriad of examples of where they do. But getting the project management right, we do lots of quality checks on all our kit before it goes out of our warehouse to customer sites to make sure it minimizes the chances of failure. But I'll take you back to the principle of our proposition, which is it's a retrofit proposition. We unbolt the old one and we bolt in the new one and we hook it up to the fan. And that's a process of 2 to 3 hours. And so for those stores, the level of being without air moving around their store was only 2 to 3 hours and, a minimal level of disruption.
And then not to have you speak for Wilko, but I mean, they won that award and then, they got good PR out of it. They got to increase their relationships with their customers who I'm sure, really wanted Wilko to make a decision or a move that would increase its sustainability. What does this sort of improvement, award or no award, mean for them, for their brand, for their reputation?
Yeah. Well, talking to James at Wilko, he said that their customers care about the environment and they care about buying stuff from people that also care. And that's the reality. Lots of people care about the environment and they're going to make decisions about who they buy stuff from, who they trade with, who they invest in, based on what that organization is doing to get to net zero, to contribute to the sustainability agenda. That ain't going away. That's just going to accelerate. And forward-thinking organizations like Wilko will give themselves and have given themselves competitive advantage by undertaking projects like this.
So I was hoping to wrap up by learning a little bit more about you. I'm curious, why did you choose a career in sustainability?
Well, I'll try and keep the answer relatively short. I've worked in lots of organizations over the years, and I much prefer working in a business where I make a positive difference, not just to the business, but to society, to the one that sounds sort of rather grand. But if you're going to go to work every day, if you're going to put your heart and soul into something, isn't it better to put your heart and soul into something that matters, that makes a positive difference, than it is to something that not matters? Now, earlier in my career, I really cared. It's all about climbing up the greasy pole and making a little bit of money. But as I've matured, then the last 3 organizations I've worked for have been where we make a difference, where that business makes a positive difference. And when I had the opportunity to join Future Motors, it was a really, really, my previous role, I had a very large team and was joining a startup. And to make that decision to join a much smaller organization with all the risk it entails, then there has to be a good reason for you to do that. And the reason that made me do that was that I could see how this could make a real difference. And what I did could actually matter, albeit modestly, but it actually matters. And when you look at yourself in the mirror in the morning before you start work, it gives you at least a little bit of comfort that the endeavors that you're about to embark upon during the day actually matter.
Yeah, that's great advice. And, I like to end these conversations along that same note on an optimistic tone. So my last question for you, since you've joined Future Motors, what have you seen that has made you hopeful for the future?
I think there's been a number of things, but I think if I were to choose one thing, then this is that was sustainability, net zero, climate change. And I've sat in board meetings and senior management meetings where they were discussed, and they were discussed as obligations or necessary evils, which could potentially disrupt areas. They were sustainability was a distraction from what was really important, which was about making money. I think the one hopeful thing I'm seeing now is that actually people in business get it. It is not quite where it needs to be yet, but it is getting to the top of the agenda, and it's being done because it matters, because people do have a level of altruism in their behavior, and it's being taken seriously. And, I've seen lots of examples of people driving this through many organizations. And to coin a terrible phrase, not all heroes wear capes.
Fantastic. That's great to hear. So we're coming up on time. Before I let you go, where can people go to learn more about you?
If you want to learn a bit more about our business and what we do, we have a website. You won't be surprised to find out, futuremotors.co.uk. And if you'd like to go to the website, and if you'd like to talk to us a bit more, then please do. If you don't, well, then good luck to you.
Well, I highly recommend that everyone who's listening check you out. So Andy, thanks again for everything you're doing to make our world more sustainable. I'm going to let you go, but you've been a fantastic addition to Net Zero Action Heroes. It was great chatting with you.
Thanks, Chris. I enjoyed the meeting. Thank you.
Thanks for checking out this episode of Net Zero Action Heroes. This show is brought to you by Turntide Technologies, an award-winning sustainability company. If you enjoyed this episode, then follow Net Zero Action Heroes wherever you get your favorite podcasts, or join us online at turntide.com/heroes for all of our latest episodes.